the Detroit Lions, of course, are on Hard Knocks. That's kind of the big story right now. The Lions are a team that, if you're not a fan of any other team in the NFC North, like the Packers, Vikings, or the Bears, you're probably somewhat cheering for the Lions, right? Because they've had some disappointing years. And now with Dan Campbell in his second year, a lot of people love Dan Campbell. But what have you thought about Hard Knocks so far? And is there anything that's really shocked you so far in the show?
Nothing really shocking. I think when I look at Dan Campbell and watch him and you kind of get the behind the scenes glimpse of him, I get the sense that he's a real big rah-rah kind of coach. And I think we knew that when he got hired, the whole biting kneecaps press conference when he got hired, and some of the things that come out of his mouth are almost a little shocking. He's not the most buttoned up coach, so to speak, but he wears his heart on his sleeve. He's a passionate guy. You can tell he's a fired up guy. He's a guy that's really has his players, I think, that playing hard for him. If you look at last year, this is a team that really didn't have a lot of talent. They had a lot of holes on this roster, and they were in a lot of games. They didn't win a lot of games, but they were competitive. And I think it says a lot about him, his mentality, and what type of team he's trying to build there. So from that standpoint, I think you've got to be excited for what he's building. I don't know if it's going to last long-term. Rah-rah coaches tend to kind of burn out. I'd like to see more X's and O's improvement from him this season. But as far as like watching him in the show and kind of getting a glimpse of him, it's been interesting for sure. You get the mentality that we know he's a former player, but boy, it really comes across when you're watching him like working out with the team and doing some of the things that he did at practice in the Hard Knocks. It's surprising. I don't think a lot of coaches are taking the angle that he takes.
Yeah, it seems like Dan Campbell kind of reminds a lot of people of Mike Vrabel of the Titans, where he shows a lot. Like I said, as you mentioned, he shows a lot of emotions. He's not really an X's and O's guy, but he's definitely there. You can definitely tell he wants to win. Detroit, as you mentioned too, Detroit was in most of games last year. They probably should have beat the Ravens if it wasn't for Justin Tucker being the greatest kicker of all time. They did beat the Packers late in the year. They blew out the Cardinals. They beat the Vikings on literally the last second. So I think this Lions team is going to be better last year. I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs. A lot of people do. Do you think Detroit makes the playoffs this year?
I don't think so. I think when I look at it, Vegas has the over-under win total for them right now at 6.5. It's hard for me to think that a team that went 3-13, or I should say 3-13-1, is going to make the playoffs. I mean, that's a big jump to get from that to the playoffs. But if you look at that over-under win total, if Vegas thinks that they're maybe a 6 or 7 win team, that's a big improvement. If they get to 6 wins, that's doubling their win total. And that's a great improvement for this team. I thought they had a nice draft. I thought they really have upgraded the roster, especially in some key spots where they needed to. And like I said, this is a team that really plays hard for Dan Campbell. So it's going to be interesting. I think this is a team that's going to show some improvement this year. I'd be surprised if they were the number 2 pick in the draft again, or, even a top 3 pick. I think this is the team that maybe gets out and wins a few of those games that they didn't quite pull off last year. Maybe they get to 6 or 7 wins and start moving in the right direction. And I think for Lions fans, that's all you can really hope for.
Yeah, and I think, too, their division isn't super tough. They do have the Packers, which are probably going to win the division again, and they do have the Vikings, who not a lot of people are talking about, but they're probably definitely better than the Bears, and especially what they're dealing with right now. I think they're better than the Bears, but to make the playoffs, I feel like that's a bit of a stretch. I think I have them predicted to go 7-10 and be in most of the games. I could see them beating the Packers once, but I think it'd be hard for them to go into Lambeau. I think if they end up beating the Packers, it's probably going to be in Detroit. I could see them sweeping the Bears, but I think making the playoffs is a bit of a stretch. But the NFC isn't as stacked as the AFC, right? So I could see them making a little bit of a run, but the playoffs is very hard to see, even with the 7 teams now. But the one position I'm not really big on with Detroit is their quarterback position. I don't think Jared Goff is good enough to lead the Lions to the playoffs. And Detroit seems very confident in Jared Goff. They didn't draft any quarterback. They didn't even draft one the 3rd or 4th or 5th round. I think they brought back Tim Boyle and David Blau. Do you think Jared Goff, I mean, I know he was the number 1 pick at one time, but he was not very good last year for the most part. Do you think Jared Goff is the guy for Detroit, or what do you think about Jared Goff in general?
Well, I think he's an okay quarterback. I think he's kind of a middle of the road guy. I think
Mhm.
if he has the right pieces around him, like we saw in LA there
Yeah.
for a while, if he's got the right pieces around him, I think he can have success. And that's really the majority of quarterbacks in the NFL. That's kind of the group they're in. They need everything around them to be at least
Mhm.
above average for them to have success. And he kind of falls into that group. I don't think he's a terrible quarterback by any means. I'm not sure he's a guy that can take him to the promised land or anything like that, or even the playoffs with this roster. But I think when you mentioned about believing in Jared Goff, I think they believe in him to an extent.
Mhm.
If this would have been a different draft class and there was some top level quarterbacks in this draft instead of taking Aiden Hutchinson, I'm pretty sure they would have taken a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud if one of those type of guys were available. This just happened to be an oddly weak quarterback class, one of the weakest ones we've seen in years. So I just think it really had more to do with who was available at that spot and just realizing, like, look, we got a veteran guy. He's decent. We can ride with Goff for another season. If the wheels come off and they're picking in the top 5 again, I would not be the least bit surprised if they go after a quarterback in this next year's class.
Yeah, and the quarterback class is really deep. But yeah, I do agree with you as well with the Lions believing him an extent. And of course, the quarterback class, there was only one quarterback taken in the first round. There was none in the second. I think there was like 3 in the third. But it did seem interesting that they decided to wait. But at the same time, I think too next year, if Detroit only wins a few more games and they're once again in the position to draft a guy like Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, or even I'm assuming Spencer Rattler is going to be ranked pretty high as well. That's probably going to be somewhere in there.